we are going to be having a chat today about a few things. One of the things we're going to talk about, and we'll start the show with this, is well, I'm going to call it the controversy around Libs of TikTok. Don't know if it is a controversy, but there's kind of two aspects to this conversation. One is the what Libs of TikTok is, right? And I'll show you some bits and pieces. But the second is what's happened in the last sort of 36, 48, 72 hours, and accusations of doxing. And for those that don't know, I mean, I'll bring it out right now. The definition of doxing is to dox is to search for and publish private and identifying information about a particular individual on the internet. So search for and publishing private or identifying information about a particular individual on the internet, typically with malice intent. So that's what doxing is. So if you put out someone's details, that makes it so that they can be tracked and traced, that's what's considered doxing. And in the internet world, doxing, I think it would be fair to say, George, is like the greatest sin, or it certainly has been for a very long time. That if you, I mean, like, you know, when you're talking about something, or you're talking to someone, or even if you're shredding someone on the internet, like some people do, you don't put out information that then enables that person to be tracked, because if you do, they then potentially can come in harm's way. You know, it only takes one nutter to go down the wrong path and then track them. Would that be fair, George?
Yeah, I guess so much of the internet is like based on the ability to communicate anonymously. But lots of people communicate with their full names.
Yeah.
As well. And in that context, I think doxing seems to be more used when it comes to addresses and that sort of thing, physical location.
And also, it's getting harder and harder. I mean, to be honest with you, as people who book interviews and ask people to come on, even if they're not profile people, they're pretty easy to track down. I remember we had Jenny McGee on, who was the nurse who looked after Boris Johnson when he got. I just went to her Facebook page, sent her a message. So
yeah.
I couldn't turn up to her door and, hi, can you come on? So I didn't know where exactly she was. But actually, when doxing talks about information online that kind of makes them identifiable and contactable, the contactable thing is getting easier and easier and easier and easier. So maybe the idea of doxing is slightly changing to being more about, can you physically get to this person? I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe
because it's a term that's always been based in the culture of the internet. So therefore, it's a term describing that divide between the fleshiness of the physical world and the anonymous nature of online conversations.
Yeah. And like, I mean, you think about it in journalism as well. Journalists do this all the time. Like if you were doing a story on a slumlord, and you said, you know, Jimmy Jones is the landlord of this building, that's fine. But if you said Jimmy Jones is the landlord of his building, his offices are locating at, and his phone number is, that would be an extreme. But I guess the in-between ground is if you went, Jimmy Jones is the landlord of this building, his company, and then listed the company name, which then had an easily trackable office, which then means you could locate him. That's sort of I think the gray area at the moment, because the report or the journalist or the blog or the whatever hasn't actually said here's his contact details, but it's given information that makes it very easy for a one step to connect with that person.
Well, yeah, I mean, back in the day, I mean, it was very common to see employers and their workplace, bad employers and their workplace being displayed on Fair Go on national television, right?
Yep.
So I think what's happened, and I haven't studied privacy, you know, theoretically or as a scholar or anything, but I'm guessing that privacy in and of itself has changed. Our concept of privacy has changed because we're so interconnected now, because we have these tools now. So, I mean, you know, maybe we're even more precious about it as well now, because in that older case, it was just the local small business tyrant down the road who's an arsehole. Everyone knows where he lives, but nothing really comes of it. And maybe there's an American kind of context here as well that's muddying the waters.
That gun culture,
People,
maybe.
yeah, people go over and shoot you, or do there's YouTube personalities that or streamers that do go to quite for long lengths to not get their address out there, because then they get swatted. Or the Proud Boys so Vic Berger, an online content creator, the Proud Boys turned up at his house wanting to fight him, because that's part of their initiation. Proud Boys being a alt-right gang, basically, slash sort of online media subculture.
There's also this idea you're talking about, fair go, and actually, it's funnily enough, I think it's called A Current Affair. It's an Australian one. It's been popping up in my YouTube feed the last few days, and it's a similar thing. There'll be the person who sells themselves. I watched one the other day as the wealth guru, but all the people who have been using this wealth guru think that she's now a rip-off merchant. So A Current Affair turns up to confront them. Camera on the shoulder, reporter with there. In those instances, though, you don't necessarily know where the person is. Certainly on this side of the world, I don't know. I have their name and I have their online sort of what they do, but you don't know where. Like, I'm thinking about the classic fair go situations where reporters had ladders thrown at them and stuff because they turned up. It's unless you're local, like you said, it's much harder to identify where that person is. I mean, if it's the dirtbag, that's 3 doors down from you, so be it. But if you're in a different part of the country or the world, I don't think that gives identifiable information as to how to contact that person necessarily. The difference now is because everything's online. If you're talking about an online thing, then almost by definition, you're contactable if you get identified. So maybe, again, as you're talking about privacy, there's a difference between sort of personal, physical privacy in that sort of media context and information privacy, maybe it is, when it comes to an online presence.
Yeah, well, the other distinction I think we're going to have to make is, are we talking about within journalism with its strong ethical principles, or because to a hacktivist, for example, they measure it, their measure of, is this person in a position where they should be held accountable in terms of their naming. Their measure of that and a journalist's measure of that are going to be different, right? But I think that is sort of the measure that seems to be used. This person is in a position of power, or has used their anonymous status to cause harm, or do something like that, then uncovering them their personal information, and by that I mean just name or job or whatever, identifying information is justified. I think those are sort of the scales that people use.
So, I mean, we've kind of started talking about it without talking about the whole show. So let's just keep going. So this whole hubbub, this whole situation has popped up because there was an article written for the Washington Post, and you can see it right here, where a reporter has gone behind the scenes. And can I just say, I was going to say, this is not good journalism, meaning what has actually been done is pretty level one. Basically gone on to the domain names. You can do a who as on a domain name. Anyone can do this, and found the phone number of the person who registered a domain name, and that linked to a person's name. This is not really a deep dive, deep throat kind of investigation. It's a pretty simple one that really anyone could have done. This reporter from Taylor Lorenz is her name, from the Washington Post, is the one who did it, and outed, if that's the correct word, the person who was behind this account, Libs of TikTok. We should probably say as well, if you don't know what Libs of TikTok is, Libs of TikTok is a Twitter account. I learned about it from Joe Rogan. So that's one of the criticisms, that there are some people who are magnifying this and they're making it more popular. And it's what the Washington Post article is saying is that the right in America is using Libs of TikTok as a farming system to spread, I guess, propaganda based on a minority position within the left. Because no matter what you say, this is one person on TikTok, and it may or may not be representative of what the whole political left may or may not think. So here's an example of one, and I brought this one up in particularly because one of the criticisms of the Libs of TikTok is they use various tropes and words and angles to make it look like, to further the narrative that left-wing ideologues are trying to groom and sexualize your children. Now, I'll pop back one into Libs of TikTok in a second to show that that's actually, I had to go quite a long way. George was watching me. I had to go quite a long way through to find one that actually used the word groom. But it is there.
Not that far, considering that this is a Twitter account that posts all the time, though.
Yeah, well, true. But I probably think it would be fair to say that the majority of them don't.
But hang on, isn't that a fair indication of of the discourse at the moment, that legislation is, and again, this is getting beyond the doxing, but it's sort of contextual. That's
Sure.
sort of that's the flavor of the discourse at the moment, is that the lefties are trying to make my kid gay, right? That's sort of the dog whistle. Yeah. Just to add some context to people that might not understand.
So, well, I mean, what the Libs of TikTok does, for people who don't know, and I know most of you know, I'm trying to suck lemons here, is that it goes into TikTok and it finds, I guess, liberals, libs, people who they would refer to as woke, fair enough, whatever, and they just repost their TikTok videos, and then they often add a commentary to it. So this commentary says, and this is a quote from the video, it says, parents need to stay the fuck out of classrooms. And then the owner or the person who runs Libs of TikTok was said, this is what the left really thinks. Listen when they tell you they want to take your kids to groom and indoctrinate them behind your back. So the actual video on Libs of TikTok is someone responding to a comment that says, teachers have no business teaching kids about sexual orientation and gender identity at this age. That's the parents' problem. And this person responds like this.
I'm giving this dude one last chance to get the fucking point. We don't like this. My community specifically does not like this. You want to know why personally I don't like this? Because when it's the parents' problem, that's how you get homophobic kids. That's how you get kids like me with internalized homophobia until they're like 18 or 19 because they finally started going to fucking therapy. If my parents had their way, I wouldn't know shit about the gay community.
Just a side note on the actual way that this person's filming.
The
just
cinematography.
Yeah, can you stop with the massive zoom ins? That's kind of distracting from your message. That's just a thought, just a side note.
Or my own legitimate sexual identity. I came out to them when I was 16. You want to know what they told me? They told me I was going to unalive myself because of this. I was an already depressed teenager. So when you say it's the parents' problem, understand that the parents are not going to make the best decision. They're not going to educate their kids. If it weren't for public school, I wouldn't know shit about the gay community. Unless it's a private school, parents need to stay the fuck out of classrooms.
I think ironically, I didn't think this at the time, George, but she's kind of actually echoed I'm not saying that it's fair, but she's kind of actually echoed the criticisms from the right, because she said if it wasn't for public school, I'd know nothing about the gay community, aka the public school taught me everything I need to know about the gay community. And that's ironically kind of the criticisms that the right's throwing at it. So look, I'm just rolling through a bit, and this is just showing you some more. So this is what it does. Letting kids choose their gender identity is now consent. Parents who let their kids choose their gender are child abusers. So there you go. That's following that narrative as well. So we don't have to follow much more to talk more about it. Diversity is my favorite thing to teach, says non-binary preschool teacher who also makes 4-year-olds pick a pronoun pin every day to wear.
Recently, we started wearing pronoun pins, and the kids get to pick a new pronoun.
So you get the idea. Goes through and finds conversations. Students at something or other school were treated to a drag queen performance by a drag teacher during school hours. Imagine if they focused on teaching math and science and history instead of drag. This is sickening, says this person.
It's funny because cross-dressing has been a huge part of school performances for decades.
That's true. Speaking to someone who went to an all-boys boarding school, my dad went to the same all-boys boarding school. I mean, we used to do our productions with a sister school, but when my dad was at the same school I went to, they had to play all the female roles themselves when they did Gilbert and Sullivan.
It's like this. It's like the Sevens in Wellington. It's like the one night that all the homophobe jocks are able to dress up as chicks.
So that's what Libs of TikTok is. The Washington Post then reported who was behind. So it was a big secret. Libs of TikTok, who was behind it was a big secret. No one really knew. Although they'd done a few interviews, it was always kind of incognito with a voice like this. Oh, that's Libs of TikTok. You know, you never knew who it was. So they kind of outed them. They said who it was. And now the conversation from the right, as they are pearl clutching quite a bit, is, oh, doxing. And the conversation from the left is, well, they deserve to be doxed, which is an interesting position to take. And actually, I guess, let's have a look at one left-wing commentary at the moment who have kind of said that. I don't want to be unfair to them, so I'll just play. It's a producer in the background talking about what they think about this person and their name being released publicly. The people who are running TikTok, Libs of TikTok.
I'll just say, I just want to say her name publicly. I mean, the only problem with this report, in my opinion, would be if they pointed the finger at the wrong person and the actual freak behind this account went unnamed. But I will just say right now, it looks like Newsweek has it. Chaya Raychick. You'll find a street easy profile for Chaya. If you, Brown followed up by saying that by searching the phone number listed on the domain registration for Libs of TikTok, you'll find a street easy profile for a Chaya Raychick, who was a licensed real estate salesperson. Interesting, the class back, more populism. This is the sort of populism. This is the type of person who's really amenable to Glenn Greenwald's style of populism, is the bigoted real estate broker.
So there you go. I mean, like, it's just an example that we found. And then the conversation starts. So it seems in this one, the right saying you should never release information of people publicly, although the right has done that for a very long time. The left is saying, fair enough too, because they were bad enough to be outed. And then the conversation around doxing starts. So has this person been doxed? Are we okay with doxing this person? Is it, I mean, to me, the idea we've just talked about it of being able to be tracked down physically is a part of it. So, I mean, you think about wherever you are in the country or the world, a local real estate agent, if you knew their name, the city or suburb they work in, and their job as a real estate agent, you'd be able to get their phone number, where their offices are, their email address, all those sorts of things. Which means, I guess, if you can find their workplace address, you'd be able to make physical contact as well. I don't know. It makes me a smidge uncomfortable that far is gone. But then again, if you just said her name, then you could probably get all those things anyway, because searching her name would bring that up. George, what do you think?
Yeah, well, you said before how easy it was to find who she was as well. So I guess maybe, I don't know. I guess she, in terms of expectations of privacy, obviously she wasn't freely naming who she was. So she was trying to be private, I guess. So I know nothing about Libs of TikTok. I can imagine the sort of moral panic sort of baiting that they do. I mean, we saw it with the grooming sort of thing. Where I see doxing, and let's just call it doxing for simplicity's sake, where I see that as not a valid tool of journalism, but a valid tool of political antagonism and political combat, would be like, naming, if there was like a real estate agent in the Octagon doing a big neo-Nazi rally, for example.
Yeah,
I think, well, actually, in terms of journalism as well, that would be totally all right to name them and their job in the local paper, right?
Yeah,
I see that as a totally fair use of what we're calling now doxing.
Do you think we have a different perspective in New Zealand because of the gun thing? I mean, I think about, when they talked about that pizza parlor being a place of pedophiles, and, there being a basement that the Democrats were holding and drinking people's blood, or whatever the fuck they were saying. And then what happened is someone turned up to that pizza parlor with a gun.
That is the history of doxing in America, is actually releasing the information of anti-abortion, of abortion clinic doctors, so people could go and assassinate them. Seems to be, just from what I've been reading this morning, the sort of history of doxing. So it has been not only a tool of political discourse, but political violence in America, and I'm sure elsewhere in the world. Whereas, I guess in the context of, maybe you wouldn't say a bakery owner in Dunedin wasn't paying their workers, or no, rather, you wouldn't say, there is an employer in Dunedin who isn't paying their workers. you'd name them, right, and you'd say where they were and that sort of thing. I guess
wonder
for the crime of running Libs of TikTok, I guess this sort of depends on, and that's actually a really good example of why this annoys me sometimes, right? Is that it seems like the real leftist fight, and I know that's sort of annoying to say, the real leftist fight gets sort of left to the side for these more superficial fights on TikTok or whatever it is, Twitter, which are not substitutes for political action. They're just sort of tools for them. But I guess that's sort of what I was going to say. Libs of TikTok, the crime of running Libs of TikTok, sort of depends on like how we define what Libs of TikTok is, right? Say it was of interest to actually find out, this huge super PAC is behind this Twitter account or something like this, right? Or if we, again, it's part of this internet, how the internet has really kind of changed the environment. Do we see Libs of TikTok as a media organization that needs to be held to account? We want to know, in a democratic, transparent society, we want to know how they're funded, who dictates the agenda at that media organization, all the sort of things that we should, as a transparent, democratic society, want to know. We want to know who's shifting the agenda at this specific institution that seems to have so much influence, even if just on the online space. So I think that's the calculation you have to make, right?
I hear what you're saying, and I think it's really interesting because I always try and relate it to myself and to situations I've been in. So let's just say one day in the future, shall I pick a ridiculous number?
Yes.
We had, I think they've got about 600,000 followers. Let's just say we interact with 600,000 people in what we're doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Does that therefore give the public the right to know all the things you've just said of Libs of TikTok? Or is it none of their business and we'll run our business or our show however we deem fit? Do you know what I mean? Like the other thing is, having been in an experience where working for radio stations, I have had a letter come to my house that says, do you see how easy it is to track you down? I even though I was an absolute nobody in that world, had no influence whatsoever, was just a mid-dawn jock on a radio station talking to people. I feel like I've got a bit more of a context to it, and I kind of think, if we ended up having a very large audience, at what point do we then go, oh well, now the public has to know everything that's going on and they have to know all our financial details and what's going on behind us? You know what I mean? I mean, are we suffering a little bit from, because it doesn't affect us, we can go, oh well, it's because we need to know what they're up to. If we were in their position, does everyone need to know what we're up to?
I think I mean it on more of a structural level. Say that we fronted ourselves as a grassroots news network and we were funded by BP. That's, I guess, what I mean, right? Not that that means our address would get leaked, but that would mean that, some sort of background information is leaked. I guess maybe I'm skirting away from doxing a little bit, but I guess I'm just adding in that calculation of like, who should we hold accountable? And when should I mean, this one's quite interesting. I half expect, some super PAC to be behind it, but behind things like this, but it is just some real estate.
I was going to say that, I don't want to interrupt you, but this does seem to be a grassroots, one single individual person
I mean,
who has started
maybe
this
there's
up
more
and got audience.
reporting to come. But yeah, I mean, that's an indication of, again, politics in the age of the internet and how these sorts of things work. It's just a shame that real estate agent will not be getting the sort of, I guess, the Fox News salary, should we say. I mean, and again, that's how content works, right? It's sort of just it's sort of aggregated and pulled together by a community of people, for better or worse. But yeah, I guess my point was sort of, who do we as a society label as held accountable enough that they should be identified and that they shouldn't be anonymous? And maybe Libs of TikTok is a really sort of low stakes example of this, and maybe would be better off finding high stakes examples.
And just because you've mentioned them, how much would BP have to pay you to throw away all your values out of interest? Just we should throw a number out to them, maybe? No? Yes? No? Okay, we won't do that. Yeah, all right. I think it's interesting. I think that the idea of being private, like I said to you before we started, because we couldn't stop talking about this. As much as you this is beneath your academia, George, we couldn't stop talking about it before we started. Is that, if you did something, let's not say this, but if you did something in the media and all of a sudden you had hundreds of thousands of viewers or readers or listeners, if your privacy wasn't protected, you would have hundreds, if not thousands, of communications a day coming through to you. And it's that element of it as well. And I don't know, it's maybe I'm being naive, and I'll put my hand up and say I'm being naive, but maybe I am. It feels a little bit like the defending someone's right to free speech, even if you find what they're saying abhorrent. Like, we might agree that when you look through that Libs of TikTok, it's full of attacks on LGBT community and teachers, and primarily those two things connected. But if I was to flip it and say, for whatever reason, you or I or someone we know was doing the opposite, and I'll say exposing from their perspective, not that this is necessarily exposing, some radical right agenda, and then they got all their information released, so they were contactable and they had to go into hiding for their safety, would we be okay with that? And I know we said that maybe nuance plays a part. Maybe it does, but also maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, I think that for example, the Charlottesville one is the ones that's already always brought up, right? Those people were out there in public saying Jews will not replace us and all sorts of things, and then cried when they got fired from their jobs, right?
Well, let me throw you a real one out that we didn't talk about yesterday. We were going to, but the Sandyville shooters, the families of the Sandyville victims.
Sandyville?
Sandy Hook victims' families. I mean, as wrong as we know he was, Alex Jones was putting out there what he thought was correct, and then a whole bunch of families were getting actually attacked. Stories of families having to move 7 times because of the information he was putting out there. We'd obviously say that's abhorrent and wrong, but are we okay to say that this is okay? It's not that bad. I mean, yeah, it's just, I guess I'm talking about the principle versus the reality of the nuance, but maybe I can't do that.
But once you're out in a public square calling for, an ethno state, you're putting yourself out there in a public square calling for an ethno state.